go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting. Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
This could be the beginning of the end for the human race. For what men first thought were meteors or the often ridiculed flying saucers are in reality the flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars.
Looks like they're gonna come out of that gully pretty soon. We'll have to rush our defenses to be ready when they do.
The guard can need plenty of reinforcements.
We'll get them. Lieutenant! Look!
They slash across country like scythes, wiping out everything that's trying to get away from them.
That explains why communication is cut the moment their machines begin moving.
Montreal's blacked out. Nothing more's come through.
Same thing that happened on the Pacific coast. Anything from them yet?
No, Mr. Secretary, we've had nothing from San Francisco for over 5 hours.
The nations of the world mobilize their armed might, rushing to defend the Earth against the unknown weapons of the super race from the Red Planet. Is there nothing that can stop the Martian death machines?
Guns, tanks, bombs. They're like toys against them.
We know now that we can't beat their machines. We've got to beat them.
All over the world, human beings cower before the onslaught of these unearthly enemies, whom no one has ever seen. Panic that sweeps around the globe as the great masses of mankind flee blindly in a headlong stampede of hysteria.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects, vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your mission commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen.
And on this episode of Planet 8, we're going to be talking about the radio dramatization, the films, and there might even be, I hear tell, a comic book that covers the H.G. Wells classic, War of the Worlds. Straight away, we're going to kick it over to our chief engineer, Bob. Take it away.
Well, War of the Worlds, I love War of the Worlds, I got to say. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell a story or two about the movie when we get to it. But, I want to start off actually with, obviously the novel was published in 1898, which is long time ago. That's even like before I was born. So,
ancient history.
Yeah, I did read the novel quite a while ago. I think I read it like in high school or college.
Mm-hmm.
Which was shortly after it was published. But
you and George Washington and Jesus.
That's right. I think I lent it to Abraham Lincoln at one point. So
before you went to the theater.
Yeah. But as far as like movies, and obviously, you know, I would assume, although I won't take it for granted, that most listeners know that it was a radio dramatization at one point. But if we go back to 1925, Cecil B. DeMille was interested in making a movie out of War of the Worlds. A script was written, but it never materialized. So think about that. You know, what, Cecil B. DeMille, like 10 Commandments and all these really epic films. Although in 1925, I don't know what kind of special effects they would have had.
Well, I wonder, when was like First Man in the Moon made? They used, what did they use? Sort of like 2D effects to make like the little rocket shot out of the cannon.
Yeah, they had like models and they had little cutouts and everything else. It would probably be the same type of thing.
Maybe something like that.
So
that would have been interesting.
In the 1930s, Sergei Einstein and makeup artist Wally Westmore, who I'm thinking is probably like one of the first Westmores, and that's a whole storied Hollywood story right in and of itself. He wanted to tackle it, but again, that went nowhere.
Yeah.
So a third attempt, Alexander Korda in England showed interest, but he ended up doing Things to Come, which was another H.G. Wells story. So finally, and also, and this one I thought was like really interesting, Alfred Hitchcock approached H.G. Wells in the 30s wanting to make War of the Worlds. And Wells told him that Paramount had the rights tied up and he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I think
I did hear that one.
Yeah, I think that one actually would have been pretty interesting. But we fast forward to October 30th, 1938. And Orson Welles, no relation to H.G. Wells, produced a radio drama of the novel for Mercury Theater on the Air. And this was a radio show. It was billed as a Halloween story because it was actually the night before Halloween. And warnings went out before the show and leading up to the show, you know, saying that this was going to be a dramatization, blah, blah, blah. However, due to his documentary style and the fact that it was presented as an actual radio show that was interrupted from time to time with reports of alien attack, many people of the time absolutely believed it was real. And that was basically, it's known now as the night that panicked America. Because everyone thought there was a real alien invasion going on. And if you listen to it, probably the first half or so is in that documentary style. And then the second half, which kind of takes place after the attack, is kind of more of a radio drama. But it's that first half hour that freaked people out.
Well, you think about it. I mean, it really is a sign of the times, because I remember my mother telling me stories before television. You know, she's from North Dakota. And they'd all gather around the radio to listen to the Lone Ranger or the Shadow. And, you know, there was no television. You had the newspaper. It's not like today where you just whip out your phone and, you know, figure out what the Kardashians are doing or who's running for what office. I could imagine sitting around the radio listening to this thing and being like, oh my God, you know?
Well, I mean, back then, I mean, the radio was like their main source of information, like the internet is today. And like some people with the internet today, it's like, the radio would never lie to me. You know, it's on the radio. It's got to be true.
Even some of those early films and television shows that were low budget, they wouldn't show the monster. They'd leave it to your imagination. We've talked about this off and on over the past 50 or so episodes. You know, the human imagination works wonders. And this radio, I haven't heard it for a while, but Bob, I know you recently listened to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very entertaining.
pretty good even by today's standards.
Well, that's the thing. They just listened to the first part of it and got so worked up they loaded up the truck and moved to Beverly. You know, it was like, hey, we're getting out of here. Let's go. And
those cities.
They didn't hear the rest of it.
Now, the interesting thing, you know, a lot of people know that story.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that in Chile, they did a similar radio drama in 1944 and had similar results. People in Chile were panicking. Then again, in 1949, Ecuador repeated the formula, but instead of panic, enraged listeners stormed the radio station and burned it to the ground.
Ay, Dios mío.
So, ay, caramba.
And the CIA must have had a field day with all these things, studying them.
Oh, yeah, Ecuador. I got to applaud Ecuador. What can I say? In 1968, which you think, you know, hey, that's more modern times, right? People should be a little more aware of this stuff. New York re-recorded the drama as it was with Wells. And although they made constant announcements in the weeks leading up to the broadcast and the night of the broadcast, the police still got hundreds of calls from people inquiring about an alien invasion.
Cold War.
You would think, at the very least, in 1968, if they heard Mars, they'd say, "Wait a second."
Nope.
Although I guess we hadn't really gone to Mars yet, so I guess it could still be inhabited. We never know.
I'm thinking 68 LSD. You know, that might have.
Well, that could be too. Bunch of burned out hippies. Hey man, I heard about an alien invasion on the radio. So, but that all brings us up to 1953, and in my opinion, one of the greatest science fiction films of all times, The War of the Worlds by George Pal.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I got to say, I hadn't seen this in several years. I have not even a Blu-ray, a DVD, and threw it in, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's just, it holds up. The way it's paced, the way it's filmed, and it's garishly Technicolor, but I still loved looking at it.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. The characters, you know, are there. Even though it's a spectacle, you enjoy the characters in the story. The design of the Martian machines, they didn't go with the tripods, but they kept a sort of triangular three, you know, a theme of three with everything about the Martians. And it's just a great spectacle, great story.
Well, I was reading about the whole tripod thing, and the Martian warships, which I think are amazing in this.
Yeah.
They look like a combination of like a manta ray with a cobra head sticking out of the top. Those were made by Albert Nozaki. And originally, the legs of the warships were going to be basically shown by having static electricity shot down 3 wires that were connected from the bottom of the model to basically the floor of the stage. And if you look at the very first shot of the ships coming out of the crater, you can see these little static charges coming down. Like, look, they form like 3 legs. But
they talk about it.
Yeah, but they stopped after that because A, safety, and B, they didn't want to burn down the set. So you only see it in that one shot, and you have to look really close to see it. But, you know, you're saying that you saw it on DVD. You got to get the Criterion Blu-ray because that is a thing of beauty. And
well, do they take care of the wires? Because that's the only bad thing about seeing it in high definition.
That's the key, because this movie was originally shot in 3-layer Technicolor. And when it's presented in 3-layer Technicolor, you don't see wires. When it's flattened out and put onto like DVD, then the wires all show up like crazy.
Yeah.
Now, the Criterion Blu-ray, they present it in the 3-layer Technicolor. You cannot see the wires.
Nice.
And the image is so sharp and the colors are so crisp. It's like, it's like you're watching it in the movie theater back in 1953. And I've been telling Larry this for like 2 months, and I think he finally watched it for this podcast.
I was going to say, I really appreciate the advice and things that are shared between myself and my esteemed colleagues here on Planet 8, other than their views on Batman versus Superman. I diverse. No, Bob was saying, because I do love the War of the Worlds, George Pal. I mean, that was one of the first movies I saw when I was a kid. Look, not to take anything away from Harryhausen, but those ships and the sound and the color, and man. So Bob was like, "Oh, it is a thing of beauty." He was just like, "Really, you gotta." So I invested in it, and my God, he was right. I mean, that thing. It's not like watching a brand new movie. It's the same film. And one of the things I like about the movies in the 50s, there wasn't a lot of special effects, CGI. So these actors really had to sell the story. Mm-hmm. I think the acting is fantastic. But yeah, it is crisp. The sound is crisp. I started watching the documentaries on, getting the Criterion treatment, and then also, the Blu-ray conversion and stuff, and it's a great investment.
Well, I'm going to have to do it, I think, because Criterion does put out a lot of really nice discs. I got like Island of Lost Souls and Godzilla and a few other things from them, and that was the one thing that was aggravating about watching it this time, was just like, not everything is better on DVD or Blu-ray. Some of the older stuff, like you said, you see the wires and things like that. So that would be a worthwhile investment to me to be able to see it nice and clean and beautiful, all the bright colors, but no wires. So
well, that's kind of key on any release, really, because depending on what they do. I mean, sometimes they'll go in with a DVD or Blu-ray release and they'll actually erase the wires, digitally erase them. But, a lot of people are like, hey, that's part of the movie. You got to leave it in. But you got to remember, like, back in the 50s or the 60s or whenever these old films were made, you have to remember the format they were made for. Like I say, the War of the Worlds was 3-layer Technicolor. That's what it was made for. They didn't think about, someday they're going to flatten this thing out and put it on DVD and whatever. Going back to one of my favorite subjects, Ultraman. When Ultraman first came out on DVD, and it was beautiful, sharp, great, but yeah, zippers, wires, they're all in there. Mm-hmm. And, the crew that made Ultraman basically looked at these things and said, wait. These were not made to be seen like this. They were made to be watched on a 19-inch TV with rabbit ears.
Yeah.
You can't see. That's what we only had to hide the wires so much for that. But now that it's like crystal clean, pristine, whatever, everything shows up.
That was one of the things with the remastered Star Trek, the original series, when they put that out on Blu-ray. You can actually see Spock's ears, the makeup effect where they kind of missed a little piece of glue here and there.
Well, that's why they had to redo the special effects, because the old special effects wouldn't hold up. And what happened was, when they put those on like a DVD or something, you could see, like, when the Enterprise would fly through space, you could see, like, matte boxes and things around it.
Yeah.
So they couldn't even salvage that. That wasn't even something they could clean up.
And I think they did a nice job with the new effects that they did for it. They didn't go overboard on things. A good example of that was the Arena episode, where they could have been very tempted to just, let's make a CGI Gorn.
Right.
And instead, the most they did was they had like an eyelid on the Gorn. They would flicker every once in a while. You know, they had enough respect for the material that they knew when to be subtle, you know, and not completely wipe out the original.
That was kind of freaky, because I remember the first time I watched that on DVD, and it's like, I'm like, hey, there's the Gorn, and all of a sudden he blinks. I'm like, oh, what? Holy crap. What the hell was that?
You know, and I will say there's something to be said. A couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they had Bride of Frankenstein at the AMC. They did this
Fathom events, yeah.
Yeah, and out in the wild, you know, after he escapes from the ruins of the windmill, you can see it's on a set, and the backdrop, you know, has seams in it and stuff, but some things are best left alone. Something like that doesn't really bother me, but the wires, because I've seen those transfers on VHS, the wires on those Martian ships it removes you from the movie.
It's a little distracting.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is, like, it's not 1 or 2 wires.
No.
You know, those
like
ships, they had like 12, 15 wires on them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's films. Oh, go ahead, Walker. Sorry.
Oh, I mean, it's still, the ships are absolutely beautiful. You just have to, like, tune the wires out of your head after a while.
I was going to say, there are some films, modern films, you know, quote unquote CGI, comes to mind is the Scorpion King. That is the worst. It just takes me out of the film at that point.
Well, yeah, my main complaint about CGI, and it's gotten better, but I mean, you know, a few years ago, would be 2 things. One, the lack of weight. You know, it's like CGI characters who look like they're almost floating over the ground as they're walking.
Yeah.
And then floating skin, where you would see skin texture that wouldn't move naturally with, you know, the creature or the person or whatever. Yeah. And it would kind of, you know, like I say, it's like floating skin. It's like it doesn't move along with the image. Obviously, things have gotten better now, but that would probably take me out of a movie more than seeing a couple wires or a zipper.
I remember when we talked with Webster, he was telling us stories about how, you know, this is what they planned on doing with the CGI, and then for whatever reason, they had to go in a different direction, and it just, they did what they could with whatever the film was.
Yeah, so. I mean, go back and listen to the Webster episode. I mean, he had a lot of good points on sort of the history of effects and CG and that whole thing.
Well, you know, one thing I didn't realize about the original 53 film, A War of the Worlds, until I listened to some of the documentary stuff on the disc, was that the famous gorilla man, Charlie Gamora, actually created with his daughter the Martian that runs into the farmhouse. And he was inside that kind of cylindrical body working the little arms and stuff. And that was a real surprise to me. And they had worked all night long before the next day when they were going to shoot that scene. And his daughter was on the DVD saying, you know, parts of it were still like wet that hadn't cured quite yet when they had to shoot the scene. They had to kind of redesign it. And
they threw that on him at the last minute, too.
Yeah, a lot of it was like, oh, wait, we got to redo this. We got to put this. Oh, you want to put this in? And she had little squeeze bottles she was squeezing to make the veins on the arms pulsate and everything. But yeah, as a kid, that Martian, when it would touch Ann Robinson's shoulder with those skinny little suction cup fingers, that always freaked me out. And her reaction too, because she doesn't scream immediately. She kind of has that moment where she can't breathe, and then she's like, ah. It's so effective, you know.
It is.
They have a couple.
Back then was just phenomenal.
Yeah, they had a couple kind of jump scares in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Charlie Gamora was like kneeling on a dolly, and they were like pulling him along. So, you know, thing they didn't even have. Basically, they made half an alien. It didn't have any legs or whatever. But yeah, he had these little pulleys inside the arms that he would pull to make the fingers bend. because the arms are so long.
Yeah, well, it's like a lot of gorilla suits they had too, where the arms would be longer than natural human arms, so they had to have the pulleys to work. But that was pretty cool that he worked on that.
That was a great practical effect. His daughter was at Monsterpalooza one year, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was.
Story.
Yeah, I went by the booth and talked to her. I have a button from the, but we didn't talk about War of the Worlds. I never knew he did War of the Worlds. So that was pretty neat.
Well, what did you guys talk about then? What else did he do?
Oh, he did lots of, she just talked about a lot of the guerrilla films he had done. I only talked to her for a few minutes. I wasn't there long enough probably to get the whole history. I think she did a panel though too, Larry. Do you remember?
Vaguely, I remember her talking about her dad and some of the stuff that he did.
Yeah.
It was mostly gorilla suits.
Mm-hmm.
But when you mentioned that story, it kind of jogged my memory.
Yeah, because I think they were making a documentary film on him, and I think that's why she was at Monsterpalooza that year.
Right.
So there were like things where you could go to them and meet people and talk to them face to face. That's amazing.
Yes, Bob. It was.
It was like Zoom, but it was in person.
God.
The people were there. But also, what do you guys think about, I'm sure you guys have seen the footage Harryhausen made when he wanted to do War of the Worlds, and he had the little octopus-like alien.
I love Ray Harryhausen. I love all his movies. But I think it was better just to have the limited shots here and there of the alien, and like at the end, because that shot or the sequence that he did was the alien coming out of the ship and dying basically. I thought it was much more effective just to have the arm. All they did was they had the arm come out of the ship, and then Diana stopped with the squeeze bottle, so the veins stopped moving, and then they actually changed the lighting. So there's a slight, like a green tint, and that's all it took to tell you that, hey, this thing is dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just laying there not moving. So I think, and even, and we'll get to the Tom Cruise War of the Worlds, but it was a similar thing that Spielberg did, where the arm just came out of the ship, and that was they don't show this alien writhing in pain and whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was a cool alien, kind of an octopus-type alien that Ray made. But, in this one instance, I think it was probably better that Ray did not do the movie.
What say you, Walker?
I don't know. I always would love to be able to jump into our alternate reality machine and see what his, version would be. I'm sure he would have done tripods because it would be fun to animate the three legs and all that, but
calibrate the interocitor and I'll send you over.
Well, I mean, he couldn't do War of the Worlds. He ended up doing Earth versus the Flying Saucers. That was like his alien invasion movie. So you have to think that the elements of Earth versus the Flying Saucers probably would have been in War of the Worlds, or vice versa.
And that's a great movie. I love that movie. So I think we got maybe it's the best of both worlds. We got George Powell's War of the Worlds, and we got Harryhausen's Earth versus the Flying Saucers. So,
I think I'm like you guys. I love Ray Harryhausen, his work. It was an early, mock-up that he was doing. Who knows what the final thing would have looked like? Because when you make a film, it goes through a process of the director and the producers and everyone, what was the budget going to be like for the special effects, and what would it have ultimately looked like or turned out to be. I think I'm in the camp with Karen. Set the coordinates. Let's take a look at that alternate reality version of it and see. For me, the George Powell War of the Worlds, I appreciate the glimpse of the alien that we had, but those war machines to me represent the aliens. It's just the sound of them flying, the sound of the guns shooting off. It's as iconic to me as the sound effects used in Star Wars. R2-D2 and the TIE fighters. It is just burned into my brain.
Those sound effects are pretty cool when you think about just when like the Cobra head is moving and it's got that kind of hissing kind of
right.
And then when the heat ray is firing and it's like
yeah.
You know, and it's
or like when it pulsated, it was like
yeah.
And then it was like, God.
And like the heat ray is devastating, but then the little green disintegration, and you see like that one general, he's in the bunker and he's like, everybody out, and then he gets hit and you see the skeleton glowing inside, and then he's just gone, he's disintegrated. Those are still really cool effects, you know?
Well, that general, I gotta say, that was Les Tremaine.
Oh, well, okay, he survived. I was talking about the guy that
the other guy, okay.
Disintegrated. Yeah.
Well, one of these episodes, Bob's going to join in us when we do special effects sound, and he's going to go, pew, 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 or he'll trust me. It'll just give him a little more time.
I haven't done that yet. Okay. So
give us your best Martian ray, Bob.
Well, I got to say, you know how they made that ray?
No.
That was actually the sparks coming off of a welder's torch.
Huh.
And they superimposed it over the Cobra head of the ship.
Well, it looked hot.
Which is really cool. The green ones were just like optical, cartoon effects, but the other, the main ray was a welder's torch.
Nice.
Speaking of Les Tremaine, I have a story.
You tell.
So when I was a youngster, they used to hold these conventions in Los Angeles, and they were really creatively named the Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Horror Con. And so several times I used to go. My brother Steve, who's 6 years older than me, he and his friends would go, and I would go along. And one year they had the whole cast, the main cast from War of the Worlds. So they had Gene Barry, Ann Robinson, and Les Tremaine there, and a few other people. And it was like in this big ballroom. They had it in this big hotel. It was really cool. And so we were like, oh, War of the Worlds, let's go see that. So we sat for the panel, and they had the actors talk and stuff. And this dude gets up to ask a question. And I hate to, I love our people, our nerd people. We're all, in this great brother and sisterhood of nerddom. But sometimes there is sort of a stereotypical nerd out there who he had on a windbreaker, he had on glasses, and, he gets up and he goes, Mr. Tremaine, I would like to know why the Air Force used the flying wing to drop the bomb on the Martian war machines. And poor Les Tremaine, he like sits there and he looks on either side of him and he goes, it was a movie. He's like, I wasn't actually in the military forces. I suppose they used it because it looked really good. And the guy just stood there like for a minute, like that wasn't the answer he wanted. He's like, all right, thank you. He sat down.
I love moments like that. We've been to a couple of conventions where I'm thinking of Jimmy Doohan and this guy. It was in San Francisco, actually. And this guy was like, yes, why is it that we could hear what the Romulans were saying, but no one was using the universal translate. And Jimmy Doohan's like, well, it was a cheap effect that we would use in the TV show. We had low budgets, and so we had to. No, I understand that, but they're Romulans. Yes, but sir, they were actors. Oh, actors, but they were still Romulans. And he's like, well, actually, this is a trade secret. Please, you guys, I'm going to swear you to secrecy. NBC had a special deal through the Romulan Empire that on these Zenith television sets, translators were built in. And the guy was like, oh, okay, thank you. And everyone was just hysterically, not to make fun of the guy, but it was like, God, you just... Anyway.
Hey, some people live this stuff.
Yeah.
And they go on to do
some
podcasts.
Some people even do podcasts. But...
Yeah, well,
I got to say, talking about Les Tremayne, there's another... Les Tremayne was a very famous voice actor as well. But there was another voice actor in the movie about an hour in. You see this reporter walking along with a recorder and talking, and that's Paul Frees.
Yeah.
And Paul Frees did, a lot of the old trailers back then. That's his voice narrating the trailers. He also did the voice of like the Burgermeister Meisterburger and the old Santa Claus is coming to town. And he was also the voice of Boris Badenoff in Rocky and Bullwinkle. So that was one of the few times you actually saw his face on screen. Usually he's behind a mic somewhere.
He also does a lot of the voiceover work for the Haunted Mansion.
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to say.
Disneyland.
Yeah. And he and Les Tremayne worked on a lot of the dubbed Japanese monster movies.
Mr. Freeze got around.
That's right. Mr. Freeze, what? Now we're talking Batman?
Don't say Batman versus Superman, whatever you do.
I wasn't going to go there.
Okay.
The one thing I thought, well, let's talk about, I'll bring this up when we talk about the Tom Cruise version. I had a point, but I'll save it. Let's move on then, if you guys are ready.
Yeah, well, my one little story really quickly about War of the Worlds. We did a show at the Bell Theater a while back called the SciFi X Fest. And the Bell had been doing this X Fest, which was like a UFO convention thing. And I talked to him and I said, well, hey, why don't we'll do a sci-fi side of it. You guys do your UFO side, we'll do the sci-fi side, and we'll combine it like a SciFi X Fest. Mm-hmm. And we had Marta Kristen, who played Judy from Lost in Space. She was our guest. And that was just my excuse to just program a bunch of movies that I wanted to see on the big screen I hadn't seen. And one of those, of course, was War of the Worlds. So usually during our shows, I don't get to watch the movies. I'm running around doing stuff. I made sure, though, that my butt was in the seats in the theater as we were watching War of the Worlds. And, it looked great up on the big screen.
I'll bet.
And it was probably a lot of fun to watch it with like a group of people. That's one thing I haven't been able to do with that film. It's always been at home with friends and family. But one of the things that I loved about going to the movies was that shared experience with a group of people, the gasps and the oohs and the ahs and clapping at the end and all that stuff. That must have been a lot of fun.
Yes, I miss the theater days. Actually, as we are recording this, I'm actually going to the movies this afternoon. Believe it or not, I haven't been to the movies since, probably in 6-7 months.
Which one's open?
They're doing a special screening of the CG Lupin the Third movie. Yeah, this is over in, going down to Earth and over to Redwood City to the Century over there this afternoon, and we're going to watch Lupin the Third, the first.
I had no idea they had actual movie houses open for business.
When they do open, I mean, even this one, it's like when I went to book the tickets, and I booked it for like the four of us, Lieutenant Debbie and Ensign Michael and Leah. And I mean, the seating, you usually go in and you pick your seats.
Yeah.
Really limited.
Yeah.
So you pick a block of seats, and they automatically block the seats in front of you and behind you off, and 2 seats on each side. So it's like you book 2 tickets, and suddenly you've taken up like a dozen seats.
How do you leave your seat and go to the potty if there's people around you?
No, can't do it. Sorry.
Bring a bucket.
Okay. But, so the popcorn buckets are for.
Well, have fun. And you'll have to report back to us and let us know how your experience was.
It'll be interesting. But anyway, back to War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds, it was great watching it in a movie theater with, a house full of like-minded people. I mean, that's what going to the movies is all about, really.
Right. Okay, well, we're going to transition over to the version of War of the Worlds that I've only seen once.
And that was what, yesterday or last night?
Well, okay. So over to Chief Engineer Bob.
Well, yeah, the Tom Cruise version of what one thing I'll say about Tom Cruise is, think what you will about him, you have to kind of put the personal side aside, because he makes some pretty good movies. Top Gun, and I would classify War of the Worlds in that. Yeah, I see, it's a good movie. He does a good job. I watched it again. I've seen it before. I saw it in the theaters when it came out. And I watched it again, this week leading up to the podcast here. And I think it holds up. I think it's really good. And I know Karen's got some issues with the ending, but, I thought, and, hey, if you think Tom Cruise is an ass, well, then this movie fits in because his character's an ass at the beginning. I mean, the way he treats his kids and all that, and it's like, as the movie goes on, then, he takes on more of a parental role. But I think the one scene where he and his daughter are in the basement of that one house with the guy, and, it kind of builds up where the guy, originally you think, hey, the guy's being real nice. He's letting him in. He's taking care of him. And then suddenly, he's like sitting on the stairs talking to his daughter and getting a little creepy. And then he's like panicking and he's we got to go out and fight him and we got to take him on and all that. And Tom Cruise finally figures out he's got to take this guy out. And he just has his daughter put her hands over her ears and sing this song and close her eyes. And he goes in this room and shuts the door and kills the guy. And I think that's a really powerful scene. And they pulled it off really well. But
it was a good scene. It was a young Dakota Fanning who was playing his daughter, right?
Yeah. Good
and
actress.
She's a good actress, even at that age. I can't remember his son's, the actor's name. Look, and this is just me. I don't really care too much about Tom's personal life. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I just don't like his style of acting. Now, every once in a while, the Minority Report is one of the exceptions to the rule. I do like the Minority Report. I don't necessarily like the character that Tom Cruise plays, but I do like the supporting cast. Jasmine loves Top Gun, so and again the supporting cast in Top Gun worked for me. I'm not saying anything against the supporting cast for Tom Cruise's War of the Worlds, but there wasn't a lot of them other than the children. I will say the special effects were amazing. I did like the look of the war machines. They went back. Bob was saying they went back to the three-legged version of the invasion fleet. I also like the ride at Universal Studios that you get to drive through. That's on the tram.
The jet,
well, thank God for that.
Yeah, that is actually impressive. If you guys haven't had a chance, who knows when they're going to open theme parks up again? But it is amazing because what they could do with CGI, they chose not to. They chose, and I wonder if they had a deal with Universal, hey, buy us a 747 and we'll let you guys have it for a ride or, a drive-through, whatever.
It's, the opticals in the movie, and I thought, the direction, of course, is Spielberg, but I think the direction is amazing, and the fact that, you've got this, and the same thing with Night of the Living Dead and some other movies, you have this invasion or this thing going on throughout the world, and this movie is just concentrating on this guy and his two kids. And his perspective and his observance of what's going on around him. It personalizes the movie. I think, like I said, I really enjoyed it.
Let me ask you guys something, because to me, a Spielberg film kind of has like a certain feel and a look to it, whether it's The Goonies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Jaws, his action adventure films, certainly not Schindler's List. But do you feel that War of the Worlds kind of had that Spielberg touch to it?
I don't think it has it as much as like Close Encounters or some of his other films.
Right.
I think it was a more subdued directing job by Spielberg in this one.
Well,
and I'm not trying to poo-poo Tom Cruise. Oh, go ahead, Walker. Sorry.
I would say it has less of the Spielbergian touches, except the ending. This is my problem with the ending, right? So he makes it, he's got his daughter. They're trying to get, out of trouble. They're in the city. Then they see the war machines are collapsing and blah, blah, blah. Then they get to, I think it's Boston, where the grandparents are. Miraculously, the grandparents' block just looks hunky-dory. Everything's fine and perfect. And who comes running out of the house? The grandparents, who were played by Gene Barry and Ann Robinson from the original movie. Everybody looks healthy and fine. His ex-wife, and then his son comes up. His son, who had disappeared into the midst of battle, and so we got to have
into a fireball over the hill.
Right. It's a typical Spielberg schmaltz ending. Everybody's happy and it's all sweet and gooey. And it's just like the man cannot help himself. He's got to wrap a pretty bow on the end and everything's perfect. And it's just like, oh, God, shoot me. It just killed it for me.
I feel as though that there was a discussion between Tom and Steven, and Tom's like, I want to do this. And Steven's like, yeah, but I want to do this. And Tom's like, look, give me 3/4 of the film my way and you can have the ending. And Spielberg's like, deal.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. But
it really didn't have a Spielberg feel. God, I'm trying to think. There was this movie that he did about this little boy that's a robot. It was like a Pinocchio story.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
AI, artificial intelligence.
The AI. Yeah. That was such a heavy-handed Spielberg story. Mm-hmm. And again, that's not why I don't particularly like this film. It's because it didn't have Spielberg on it. But the ending troubled me as well, Walker. I hate when they, it's like this tragic thing that potentially defines a character's life moving forward. And
yeah, kind of.
Well, I mean, I'll have to say, to this day, and probably for that reason, I hate E.T.
Oh, I've always hated E.T.
I saw it in the theaters when it first came out, and I haven't seen it since. It's like, God.
Okay, show of hands. Who owns a version of the George Pal War of the Worlds? Listeners, you can't see our hands.
You can't see hands, but they're all up.
And who has a version of DVD Blu-ray of the Tom Cruise War of the Worlds?
Yeah. Arm up.
Oh, you actually own a... Okay.
I've got the DVD. I should get if it's on Blu-ray, I should get the Blu-ray. But yeah, no, I like it. I have it.
Oh, I mean,
now who has a DVD or Blu-ray of E.T.? No hands came up.
Chirp. I will say, I actually, when I went back and watched this, my attitude going into it was like, I don't know if I'm going to want to see this. But I actually enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. I still have a negative impression of the ending, but I agree with Bob. It's a well-made movie. It's very exciting. I like the kind of the path that Tom Cruise characters is on. Tom Cruise, man, for a little guy, he runs fast. I'll give him that. Every movie he's run. That man is running. But he's a jerk. He's selfish. He's like an adolescent. He hasn't grown up, and then he's got the responsibility of these kids, and he starts shouldering that responsibility. So it's an interesting, path that he has to go on with his kids.
So you just have to watch this movie and turn it off like 5 minutes before the end.
That's probably what I need to do. Like, once the aliens die, I just need to turn it off. It's like, oh, he's still got his daughter. Hey, for having the world destroyed, that's not bad.
Well, that's the one thing about the 1953 movie is it ends as soon as you see that the Martians are dead and the war machines kind of fall over or whatever. That's the end. So
right.
yeah, they just need to.
That's good enough.
Stop
They're
it.
dead.
Stop it at that point on the new movie.
We still lost Uncle Matthew. We lost the 3 dumbasses who thought they could wave the white flag at the aliens.
That's right.
We had losses, but people were tougher back then.
So
here's another question for you guys. There are 2 scenes, nearly identical scenes of people like rioting / looting in these films. In the first film, when the scientists from Pacific Tech load up their trucks with the instrumentation because they're going to save the world, there's a bunch of guys that, take over the trucks and take the stuff away. And the cops on the scene say, I wrote it down, it was like, they say robbers, thieves, and worse. They wouldn't leave when everyone else did. So in the old movie, it was like, oh, these looters are the dregs of society. In the new movie, though, when Tom Cruise has the car with the older engine and it's the only car that'll drive, they get to the ferry and then all these people assault him and take his car, and the guy who steals the car, he gets assaulted and so on. It's really just implied those are just like everyday people. So
I think in both scenes they're still assholes.
Yeah,
but,
I would agree. But it's sort of
desperate times call for desperate measures, I guess. And
in the 50 years that passed, it was sort of like, oh, only bad people would do these things, and then by the time we get to 2005, it's like, if things go south, everybody's going to be out for themselves, right?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, look at things today. Look at all the the riots and things we have today. I mean, you have a protest and suddenly people are in there looting. So yeah, nothing's changed.
Kind of got confused. Was that a question or a comment?
I'm just saying, what do you guys think of the mindset? Because I kind of feel like, if everything went south, if we were invaded, I think it would be every man for himself. Because I don't feel like we have any unity anymore. Whereas in the 50s, people were still thinking, we'd work together or we'd do what the government told us and only the criminals would misbehave, I don't know. It was just an interesting reflection.
I think the problem, too, is that they're not necessarily bad people. They think what they're doing is right. They're going out there and doing whatever they can to protect their family, save their family, whatever. They think, they think they're right in doing what they're doing.
But at what cost?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, if you guys were in that situation and you had to save yourself and your loved one or loved ones or whatever, to what extent would you go to?
Right. Would you hit someone over the head and take their car? I'd like to think, no, I wouldn't.
Well, you never really know until you're in that situation, yeah.
Yeah, if someone comes at me and I have to defend myself, sure, but, and in the modern film, the guy steals the car and then he gets, jacked.
Yeah.
What is the line in Star Wars Episode 1, there's always a bigger fish? So, I don't know. I mean, there are glimpses of humanity where we help each other and we do the right thing. But who knows if they were to do a remake of the thing now and show. I don't know, and this is kind of jumping off subject, but there's this movie that Jazz wants me to watch. It's Anarchy or Night of... There's one night a year where they let people go out.
Oh, The Purge.
Purge.
The Red Hour.
Apparently there's like 5 or 6 of these movies.
Yeah.
Do you guys have you seen those? Is that people just go ape shit one night and?
Yeah, I saw it's like the Red Hour, Larry.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, I saw that episode of Star Trek, so I don't need to watch anything else. But you have an hour of debauchery. Go.
You are not of the body. Okay.
Yeah, no. Like I say, I think there. They always say there's limits. People won't go beyond, but I think if they're pushed, this takes a little push to get over that limit, and then
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Let me ask you guys this, kind of jumping back to the first film, because we didn't really have that scene in the Tom Cruise. The 3 guys saying, "Oh, wave a white flag. Everybody knows that means we come in peace. And, you get the great sound effect. And they, just wind up in 3 piles of dust.
Well, see, we had that movie. And then we had Independence Day where they're all on top of the building and they're going, welcome, welcome. And they just get blown away. So now people know. Going into War of the Worlds, they all know, okay, yeah, we're not messing with these guys.
To me, there's a difference in the mindset that we had in the 50s. And maybe we're desensitized to the point now where it's just like, no, they're trying to eat us or, whatever their nefarious goal.
See, now that's an interesting point, too, because in the novel, yeah, they were hoarding people and eating them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Spielberg Tom Cruise film, they were doing the same thing. They were like sucking all these people up, and then they, the ships would like digest them and spit out the blood, which I think actually goes a long way to describe or explain why this virus gets into their system.
That's a good point.
Whereas in 1953, you didn't have that. They were always, except for when they came down in the farmhouse, they're always on the ships. So how did they catch this virus or this cold?
Yeah, I guess they just didn't. Maybe it's, you have to fill in the blanks that, okay, maybe they were capturing people and we just didn't see it, so.
Maybe each ship had a scout and, I don't know that the scouts touched people's shoulders, but somehow, some way,
Well, it's like First Men in the Moon, the Harryhausen film, where the whole race of moon men, basically, well, it starts off in Victorian times when they actually go to the moon. And then it advances years later, and there's a landing on the moon, and they find this whole race, they're all dead. And they were all killed by a virus or bacteria. And the main character's like, oh, yeah, I had a little sniffle when I was up there. But, yeah, I mean, I guess that's our best defense, especially in 2020.
Right? And look, in the world that we live in now, in the fall of 2020, you have to wear a mask when you go out. You have to, hand sanitizer and.
Well, that's one thing. We will not have an alien invasion in 2020.
I was just going to say, this is the best time. If there's evil aliens who want to invade us, come now.
I mean, it's screwing up all of the aliens. Vampires can't drink clean blood. I mean, it's messing up the whole genre.
That's right.
I think the werewolves are still okay.
Werewolves are okay in zombies. One of the things I was thinking is that how COVID spreads, I could see, because, when you watch, like, The Walking Dead, and you're like, how the hell did society fall so quickly? I mean, the vestiges of government and commerce and the military.
It's not that hard to believe. Yeah.
Well, it's like what
the airlines are going bankrupt. The stores that have always been there, restaurants, they're just, the money dries up, and
our systems are super fragile.
It's like the end credits of one of the newer Planet of the Apes films. I can't remember which one it was, but they have the graphic of they're showing how things spread and how it's like you get this line from one point A to point B, and then from point B it spreads out to C, D, E, and F, and from each of those it spreads out. And it's like, it's how fast something can spread.
Yeah, it's kind of scary. But on that note, listeners, be safe. Wear a mask.
Yeah.
So,
and unless aliens are invading, then masks off.
Everybody run to the ships, breathe on the ships.
Start coughing on those ships.
Yeah, right. Breathe, fart, and sneeze like you've never done before.
Well, there were a couple other things I wanted to mention that were War of the Worlds related.
Oh,
back on subject.
Podcast.
Just bring it back around. There's a series of like young adult sci-fi novels that were written in the 60s by a guy named John Christopher, a British writer, that's called the Tripods series. It's basically based off of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, and it's sort of like if the Martians had taken over, so it's post-apocalyptic. And the technology level, like, is driven back to the Middle Ages. The Martians are in control of everybody. They do this thing called capping. So when somebody goes through puberty, they put this implant in their head to make them docile and control them. And so there's a resistance that's built up of people who the implant doesn't work on them. And it's a pretty good series. The first book in the series is called The White Mountains, and then there's a couple of other books. But it's definitely based off of War of the Worlds. So if anybody's interested in that, it's a pretty good series of books. And they made a TV series out of it in Britain in the 80s. But I actually have never seen that, so I can't say anything about the TV series.
I think it's available for streaming somewhere, because I remember kind of running across it when I was like looking for stuff for the podcast.
Yeah, I think it was fairly popular. It might have only had like 2 seasons, but I know the books are pretty.
Same name as the book, the show?
What's that, Larry?
Is it the same name as the books,
I think the show is called Tripods. Okay. So, but yeah, it's definitely, the tripods and everything are all taken from the original H.G. Wells story. And then on the comics front, one of those comics from the 70s I really used to enjoy was Killraven, also called War of the Worlds, in Amazing Adventures of Marvel Comics. So Killraven, basically the premise was the Martians come back in the year 2001, the far-flung year 2001. They come back and they conquer the world, and they keep some humans for entertainment, and some of the entertainment is gladiators. So there's this young man called Killraven, and he's a gladiator, but for whatever reason they can't control him, and he breaks free, and he frees some other gladiators, and they start a rebellion. It's very Spartacus-like. It was a really good series. I think it lasted about, I want to say somewhere, I didn't do all my research, but it lasted about 20 issues. The main writer was Don McGregor. The main artist was P. Craig Russell. It was actually a really beautifully illustrated series, and they've collected those stories now in a trade paperback, so you can get it. But really interesting stuff. They still had like tripods. They had a lot of different like mutant creatures that the Martians would breed to fight Killraven, and some really interesting sort of superheroics meets science fiction stories. So if anybody's interested, they should look that up.
That's cool.
Amazing.
I think it's funny, the maybe Paramount has the copyright. You never see the 1950s version of the ships. Usually they're like the tripods.
Well, the 1950s versions of the ships, so they returned in, what was it, Robinson Crusoe on Mars?
Yeah,
and I think they were used like there was a War of the Worlds TV series that utilized the ships as well. They didn't have the original models. I think they redid the models. In fact, Bob Burns has one of the models from the TV series.
Oh, nice.
And basically it's the same as the 53 version.
You know what's so... we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but what is so striking to me is how short a time it was, relatively, between like when Wells wrote the book and then Orson Welles did the radio play, and then the first movie was made. I mean, the book was 1898. Orson Welles does it in 1938. That's only 40 years. And like we were talking about, for us, that would be like 1980. I mean, geezers like us, something that happened in 1980 seems pretty recent, And then the first movie is 1953. So that's only 15 years after Wells does the radio play. So that would seem like nothing, like, Wells just did the play. Let's do a movie, right?
Well,
that stuff happened recently, one right after another.
The whole thing is amazing, but who knows? I mean, I assume we'll probably have another version coming up. I mean, we're about due, right? For another version of War of the Worlds?
Yeah, it's been 15 years.
So, but I mean, if you think back, though, on H.G. Wells, though, and think about the contributions he made to the science fiction genre. I mean, he wrote War of the Worlds, which is probably one of the first alien invasion stories. He wrote The Invisible Man.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote The Time Machine. Now, how many times do we deal with time travel in movies and TV shows? And, and things to come. So I think, H.G. Wells and Jules Verne were probably two of the pioneers of this whole genre.
Granddaddies.
Yeah.
We owe them a lot.
So,
and we owe George Powell because that movie is still freaking beautiful.
Yes.
Definitely.
So we're going to pitch in and buy the Blu-ray for Karen.
I got this one, Bob. Thanks.
Okay.
I got it. But yeah, if you guys both endorse it, I'm there.
Yeah, it's funny. I got it, and then I didn't have a chance to watch it. God, for months. Because between stuff for the podcast and this, that, and the other, I just didn't have time. And it's the kind of film where you don't want to have to like pause it, start it again, pause it. I just want to sit through it and just enjoy it. So we were coming up on the podcast. I picked a night, made sure, family, friends, everything was not going to happen, and just enjoyed it. And I let Bob watch it. He's like, I told you it was beautiful. I'm like, yep, it was.
I know, you watch this thing and it's like, oh.
Yeah.
The light went on.
Religious experience.
Definitely. Well, guys, any last minute thoughts, comments? Coming to a close here.
I think I covered about everything I can on the film. Just other than I love it, I recommend it. If any listeners out there have not seen it, you're in for a treat. Go get the Criterion Blu-ray.
And that is the George Powell version.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And if you haven't seen the Tom Cruise version, do yourself a favor, go and watch it, turn it off like 5 minutes before the ending, and you'll enjoy it.
And Criterion, if you're listening, we enjoy your many products.
We do.
And if you are interested in any endorsements, we're there for you.
Not to take away from like Scream Factory, they do stuff.
Arrow.
There's some good companies out there that put some good supplemental stuff together.
Yeah, lots of good companies.
But Criterion is the Criterion of the genre.
They're Criterion for a reason.
That's right. All right, guys. Well, it has come to that point in the series, and we're going to do our censor sweep. I told Bob and Karen what I was going to do the censor sweep on, and Karen was amazed. This is a book put out by the good folks at Creature Features down in Burbank. And Jeff Bond, who did the motion picture, Star Trek the Motion Picture book, Karen and I recently got.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff Bond also did a book, which I read, which is amazing, called The Music of James Bond.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he covers the soundtracks from each of the films, and amazing book.
This dude's prolific.
Yeah, no,
he's good.
I'll have to check that out, Bob, because I do love the music from the Bond films. How iconic, Jeff Bond, James Bond.
That's right, but I digress.
Yeah. Anyway, this is the Fantasy Worlds of Irwin Allen. It is since sold out, and it retailed for like $75 or $80. $80, sorry. This thing is huge, though.
Freaking huge.
And how did you get it?
I have friends.
Really?
Friends that take care of me and look after me. Actually, my wife. This is an early anniversary gift from my beloved. So I am a fortunate man in many ways.
So, sir.
Yes.
What inspired you to get this book? Because you told us something before the podcast, which is why I was amazed that you bought this book. So please
I was,
explain.
in fact, and I love using this word, I was flabbergasted.
It takes a lot for me after close to 30 years of friendship with Karen, think over 30 years, to flabbergast or give her pause. So we're talking about the Censor Sweep. I says, I got this one. I got this beautiful book, Fantasy Worlds of Irwin Allen, and I have never seen Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And Karen was like, why would you get this Irwin Allen book? Well,
I'm going to assume, though, that you've seen Lost in Space.
I have huge, and if you guys can't see I'll send Karen pictures of the book, front and back cover. When I was a little kid, 5 years old in kindergarten, Mother Keikos gets a call from Miss Payne, who was my kindergarten teacher. And Miss Payne said, Miss Keikos, come, Larry, he's running around with this coat. And I would get hand-me-downs from my cousins, and the sleeves on the coat was large for me, and I'd run around waving my arms going, danger, danger, Will Robinson, and running up on the other kids, and they're like, what the hell are you doing, Larry? So she had to come in and explain. I had one of those fat B9 robots from back in the day.
Remco.
Grandfather to, right? Do you still have yours, Bob?
Here we go to another story. When I went to my first, toy show, Tony Del Grosso took me to it, and there was one of those Remco Lost in Space robots there, and it was going for like $300-400 or something. I go, I've got that. It's in my mom's basement. I have it. I've got it. So the next time I went and visited my mom, I went down and looked. It was gone.
Oh.
I went, Mom, where's all the... Because it was gone. All my Major Matt Mason stuff was all gone. She gave it to some kid in the neighborhood.
Oh.
So that's why old stuff is valuable, because moms gave it away, burned it, destroyed it, whatever.
A good friend of mine, getting off the subject, had a... Mego Star Trek Enterprise bridge with Captain Kirk and the Gorn. He had all the aliens, and his mother had decided that he was too old to play with toys, and while he was at school, threw everything away.
Oh.
And we were going to go dig in the trash to fetch it out, because I'm like, shit, I'm not too old to play with that stuff. But the trash had already been picked up.
Oh,
so,
man.
Anyway, not only was I a fan of Lost in Space, but Land of the Giants.
Oh, that was my next question. If you weren't a Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, you had to be a Land of the Giants fan.
Yes.
Time Tunnel?
Okay.
He also had a hand in the Towering Inferno, Poseidon Adventure. There was a lot of stuff that this man was involved in. And... this I haven't had a chance to go through the whole book, but at one point they're talking about the Nielsen ratings for the different shows, and it tells you the name of the episode, what the rating was in the Nielsen's.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, there's comic books that they did with regards to Time Tunnel, and you guys, I'll try to get the pictures on the Blogspot page, but it was in Japan, and there's all this like Japanese artwork, and this thing is just gold to me. Beautiful pictures of Lost in Space. There's a foreword by Bill Mumy, and a picture of him on the set with the Netflix version of Will Robinson. So this thing, it's just, if you guys get a chance to get a hold of it, like I said, it's since sold out. You never know. Creature Features may put out a second printing. You might be able to get a hold of it then. But I highly, highly recommend this. If you're a fan of any of the shows or the movies, this is the book for you, most certainly.
Especially if you're a fan of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Now, I will say, as I said in the beginning of the show, I love my colleagues. Sometimes we differ on opinions of films and TV shows, but after watching Svengoolie last night on MeTV, I thought, I'm going to mention this book to them. I better go ahead and start recording Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. So I'm going to start catching up on those episodes.
Well, we were out in the back Monster Garage, the Planet 8 headquarters, watching Mad Monster Party last night. What was on Svengoolie?
It was... I TiVoed it. We were out visiting Jazz's friends. Jazz got a new... her early anniversary gift was the Nintendo Switch. So I was playing Mario Party, so I had to record Svengoolie. So I can't tell you the name of the film.
I thought maybe it was Irwin Allen related, since it spurred you to bring the book up.
No, it's not. God, I couldn't even tell you. Yeah, I'll have to text you guys later what it was. No, but the thing is I know after Sven, it's Star Trek, Lost in Space, because he does that at SciFi block.
There was a connection in there somewhere.
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
They show Lost in Space and and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
I knew, right?
My thoughts of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea always go back to a hallucinogenic experience I had. So, no, I was young and
young and carefree.
Joint on the counter.
I had some minor surgery, and I was laying on the couch, and the doctor had given me some sort of pain pills. I don't know. My mother was giving them to me. Anyway, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was on, and these drugs did some strange things to me. And I was watching Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and it did something. It distorted my sense of time. So I'm laying there watching it, and I'm going, oh, my God, this episode's been on for like 3 hours. And I started freaking out, and Mom, I called. I'm like, Mom, this show has been on like 3 hours. And she's like, it's been on like 15 minutes. I'm going, it's going too long. I just started tripping out, and they had to call the doctor, and they said, oh, no, and the dosage was wrong. And anyway, it was a long day, let me tell you.
The beauty of Irwin Allen is they'd have an alien on Lost in Space, and then they'd paint it green, push it under the water, and it would be on next week's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
I'm going to keep an eye out for that, Bob.
Yeah, no, you'll see a lot of Lost in Space aliens on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. See, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea started out sort of like an undersea spy show.
Yeah.
And then as it went on, then it started introducing aliens and creatures and underwater monsters, and and it got more and more bizarre. But it did introduce something that I really wish I had, and that was a flying sub.
Oh, yeah.
The flying sub is amazing.
This flying sub, Bob? No, just kidding.
What?
You guys can't see Bob's face, but his eye just kind of went, huh?
Yeah, you can always tell the difference between like the first season of Lost in Space and all the other seasons, because the first season really is more like kind of like science fiction, military, spy stuff, and then the other seasons are all just totally bonkers. And then it's kind of like Larry's Star Trek reuse theory, where like, oh, they're shooting a Nazi show down the street, or they're shooting a cowboy show, and then what shows up on Star Trek is like cowboys or whatever, because it would be like, Lost in Space, there'd be like a leprechaun or a caveman or whatever. It's like, oh, somebody must have been shooting a caveman on another set.
But the third season of Lost in Space, very much like the third season of Batman, you had the black infinite backgrounds. So when they did sets, they would just have like a few set pieces, and the background would just be black. And that would represent a library or a spaceship or whatever, It wasn't, they never did full sets in those seasons.
You know, and I guess I haven't watched episodes of Lost in Space in years, but I remember as a kid, some of those sets would scare me, you know, depending on the monsters or the creatures or whatever. It was, and, you know, the book kind of talks about how this guy was like really, really ingenious in how he would put these projects together and you know, make them work.
Well, even in the first season of Lost in Space, which was in black and white, he shot all the effects in color because he knew that, you know, second season would be in color. He could reuse all those effects, as long as they were in color. You know,
smart, yeah. Well, my friends, that draws us to a close. You guys take care of yourselves. Be safe. Until we meet again.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates. By tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.